Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Why Recoveries Fail, sponsored by Unitrends. I'm Tracy Cook with Redmond Magazine, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. Please feel free to type your questions into the Ask a Question box on the console at any time during the presentation. We'll address as many of your questions as we can during the live event. And finally, this webcast is being recorded and will be archived for future viewing. And to access the replay, you can use the same link you used today. And now on to the webcast. Up a little later is Adam Margette. He's technical specialist for Unitrends Field Training Team, supporting digital and in-market events. He's been with Unitrends for 3 years, and during which time he's been delighted at the opportunity to work with customers, prospects, and partners alike to solve challenges around business continuity. And leading us off today is Senior Resultant Howard M. Cohen, a 35-plus year executive veteran of the IT industry. He's a writer, presenter, and advisor to a wide variety of companies. He also serves on many vendor advisory panels, including Apple, Compaq, HP, IBM, and that's just to name a few. He refers to himself as a senior resultant because he has always understood that we are all measured only by our results. So with that, Howard, please take it away.
Thank you, Tracy. Tracy explained the word resultant. The senior is meant to indicate that I'm older. You may think this is just photographs of the two presenters. This is actually the before and after pictures for those working in the IT industry. Before Adam joins us, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the challenges inherent in data backup. The title, The Data Backed Up, But Will It Restore, is actually a reminiscence of a very fond memory. A team that I worked with 30, 40 years ago, always, whenever anybody said, okay, backup completed, everybody would at the same time chant, but will it restore? And, it was funny until it wasn't. I mean, the reality was that, if it didn't restore, all heck broke loose. I'll start with a simple question. Why do we back up data? Because we're supposed to? Because it's in the operations manual? No. We back up data so that we can restore it if the primary data is damaged, corrupted, or lost. Now, I bring that up because I want to point out that the purpose in backing up is to restore. Restore is everything. It is the whole goal here. So, if it doesn't restore, we've actually failed. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Now, these days, there's, of course, another reason that we back up data, and that's to make it available so we can run reports against it without impacting the production data. This is always a very good idea. The less you impact production data, the better off you are. So having backup copies of or having replicates of your main data is always a good idea. You've probably heard about the 3-2-1 rule of backup. It's pretty popular. It's out there all the time. There is a problem with it. But before I get to the problem, let me make sure that we have a common frame of reference for it. The rule is have 3 copies of your data at all times. Have one of them that's a working copy, that's a live copy, and 2 backups. As far as the 2 backups go, 2 of these copies should end up on a local device, and the other one should be off-site or in the cloud, at some location other than your location. The last being because, God forbid, you lose the entire data center due to a catastrophe. It's not like it doesn't happen in today's world. And although we'd rather not even look at it, we have to face all contingencies. So have 3 copies at all times. The good news is that today with cloud backup, the cloud backup provider is taking you beyond 3 copies. They're replicating everything to redundant and tertiary data centers. So you've got even more protection than you had before. The problem, if there's any problem with the backup, that or the replication of the data, it may affect all your copies. You may have the same problem in all places. So realize that a problem with the backup can happen at any point along the chain of backup. And there's many things that happen, which means that there's many possibilities regarding what could cause the restoration of data to fail. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is let's review some of the reasons, some of the things that happen that will cause a restore to fail. Probably the largest one, and I don't think anybody will find this surprising, is human failure. People make mistakes. We are fallible. Unlike digital devices that are either on or off, yes or no, we have shades of gray. So we may forget to rotate the media that we're backing up on and end up trying to restore from a very old backup, not having the current backup. We may be using expired media that is no longer trustworthy. So it's important to establish a rotation process and adhere to that rotation process and have some kind of check at the back so that somebody can certify that, yes, they have rotated the media. Failure to maintain the schedule and inspect what you expect. Unfortunately, you have to test these things. I say that later on I'll be reminding you that 77% of companies report that they only test their backup once per year. Of the other 23%, there are some that just don't test their backup. Others, of course, do it more frequently. But if you don't test and if you're not making sure that everything's working, the last time you want to find out that the restore didn't work is when you need to restore. I mean, I guess that goes without saying, but I've already said it. People have been known to disable the backup process. They didn't mean to. They were trying to turn off something else, but they fat-fingered it. They pressed the wrong button. They clicked the wrong square. It happens. And you need to put measures in place to make sure somebody notices that. And that means that you've got to be monitoring your backup processes at all time to confirm every day that it actually has completed. Lastly, the other thing that people can do is to misunderstand the data set. They may not know, or they may have a mistaken impression of which data entities need to be backed up. There are some that don't. There are some that need to be backed up more frequently because they're more critical. So it's very important for each backup job to know exactly which data entities are included in this job and make sure that all of them are backed up at every time. Okay, so we've talked about people. Now, obviously, the next thing to look at would be hardware failure. And let's face it, hardware can fail. More so drives than almost anything else because drives have moving parts. So, a wheel bearing can wear out. We'll find some other things that go wrong inside of hardware. But if a hardware unit fails, it may not report that it failed. As an example, back in the old days, when it was just tape backup, we would do tape backups every day, and then a tape wouldn't restore because the tape head in the tape drive had shifted ever so slightly, but it was now out of alignment, it was now out of registration, and it could not read what it had written sometime before. Or it was restored, or they tried to restore from another tape drive, and the two did not match up. A very small, minuscule problem, but one that can cause a huge disaster. Today, you've got much more hardware involved. You have not only tape drives, you have disk drives of all manner, and you have other systems that are involved in the backup process. So be aware that hardware can fail, which is more reason that you want to be testing regularly and want to be monitoring to make sure that everything completes successfully. If hardware can fail, then it follows that software can fail. This gentleman has just experienced an update that should be familiar to a lot of you. Software updates can fail. Software updates can seem to be successfully completed, but not be. And in the case of backup, the software update on the primary system may not be matched by the current software update on the redundant system, on the backup system. So it's critical to make sure that you keep both in sync with each other if indeed you're managing both. Typically, you're managing both in a co-location situation where you've put your redundant data center in a co-location facility somewhere else, but the equipment is yours. And so you have to keep everything updated. Typically, if you've given that over to a service provider, they take responsibility. But it's important to make sure that it gets done. Because at the end of the day, the data is your fiduciary responsibility. It's always the client's fiduciary responsibility, no matter how you cut it. And so, keep that in mind. Be vigilant. Make sure that everything's going the way that it should. You need to pay attention, no matter who's doing them, that patches are applied on both the primary and redundant systems so they stay matched. Similarly, you may make a configuration change in your primary servers or somewhere else in your primary environment. You may need to make that same configuration change on the redundant system. So be aware of that, have it documented in your runbook, and make sure that whoever does those changes is aware that they have to be duplicated in both places, or more if you have further tertiary redundant sites. Now, between the hardware and the software is the infrastructure. And all too many wiring closets still look like this. Infrastructure doesn't only consist of the wiring in the closet. If you ask an engineer, the network is the wire in the walls and the wireless connections that go on. And anywhere along that path, something can go wrong. In a situation like this, there may be strain on a cable, and that cable may lose connectivity. And you don't know that until you try to restore your data. So it's important to always be checking and testing. Whenever you're doing your restore testing, it's a good idea to have somebody do a health check on your internal network. Similar to your internal network, also be checking your long line communications. You may just have a long line from you to the nearest internet point of presence. Make sure it's operating properly. And if you have a redundant line, make sure that's operating properly. Having a redundant line is a great idea. One dies, it fails over to the other. But it has been known to happen that a backhoe shows up in your neighborhood and digs up a telephone pole on the corner, ripping out both of your connections. That actually happened to me in one of the data centers I worked in. And it's not funny. You are completely cut off from the world. It takes a while to find out why, and it takes even longer to get those cables put back together. So, make sure you have multiple ways to get back to the internet or back to your off-site backups, because you don't want to be dependent only on your internal backup. Now, we've talked about things that can happen. There are many things, obviously, that can happen. There are also things that people are trying to make happen. And these show up oftentimes as security failures. Now, yes, you may have a firewall that's misconfigured or isn't configured for the latest, greatest exploits because you haven't yet downloaded the new signatures. And that's going to happen. But more and more often, what we're seeing are exploits that happen because somebody decided to exploit a customer network, your network. Most frequently these days, the most popular exploit today is ransomware. Now, ransomware is insidious because it does not attack a digital component of your network. No. It attacks that most vulnerable component of your network. The first one we spoke about, the component that sits between the keyboard and the back of the chair, the human being, the user. They send a phishing email. The user is asked to click a link so they can complete some very important information that one of their vendors or providers need, maybe their bank. The email looks genuine. It's very well crafted usually to look like it really did come from your bank, but it did not. And then when you click that, that's when the disaster begins. Your data is not necessarily damaged. It may be encrypted with a key you don't have, and then you can't get at it. Or it may actually be stolen, removed completely from your drives. Typically, the ransomware fraudster will then contact you, request a certain amount of money. If you pay that money, you may get your data back. Recently, there's been an interesting development in ransomware in which large organizations are being asked for much more money than ever before, much bigger ransoms, and they are paying it because they can't afford to be without that data. They lose more per minute of downtime than the ransomware fraudster is asking for. On the other hand, smaller organizations are actually being asked for less, most likely because the fraudsters discovered that if they ask for less money, the small organization pays more often. And in the end, they end up making more in total. The bottom line is security failures and ransomware attacks can be devastating. And having a current backup of your data will protect you from having to pay that ransom. And the last thing I'll touch upon is a possibility is media failure. Now, realize you're looking at a CD, a compact disc, and this applies to DVDs as well. It actually applies to the Winchester Technology rotating disc that you use every day for your main storage. There's media in there. It's fixed media, but it's still media. And media consists of metal oxide affixed to some kind of carrier, mostly a plastic carrier. Here's the problem. Metal oxide dries, and it flakes. It kind of develops dandruff. And when it flakes and it falls off that carrier, your data falls off with it. No lie, no joke. And you may try to restore from a CD or a DVD that you recorded ages ago, and you will not be able to restore it because some of the metal oxide has flaked off. This is why we talk about retiring media, recycling the media and then having an expiration date so you don't hold on to it longer than it is very likely to restore. So be aware of that. Do not trust removable media for long-term storage. There is long-term storage available to you in the cloud today that you can feel very good about because it does not cost all that much, and it's a good place to put that retired data, that old data that may never be needed again. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of ways to fail. Let's talk about ways to keep yourself from failing. And the best solution always begins with prevention, getting there before the problem happens. The challenge is that prevention requires testing. You have to test. When you ask the question, but will it restore? Be very, very frightened, like that pair of eyes we saw in the beginning. Be very frightened that it will not restore. Be skeptical. Be cynical, because that will protect you. Testing regularly will absolutely guarantee that it will restore because you've tested it. It restored. But not testing, you're leaving yourself open to huge disappointment. And as I mentioned earlier, 77% in the most recent survey I saw, 77% of companies surveyed say that they only do a restore test once a year. And it's just not enough. So establish a best practice, doing it at least quarterly, preferably monthly, and the larger you are, the more frequently you should do it. Okay, so the testing creates the balance between prevention and cure. It takes a lot of cure to equal a little bit of prevention. So you may be wondering, well, why is it these people don't test? I mean, it's obvious. You do something, you want to make sure it's working. And there's several reasons that people cite for not testing their backups. One is that they don't want to disrupt operations. They don't want people to suddenly not have access to the network because it's in the middle of a restore. And there are ways around that. If you're not a 21-shift operation, then you do it during downtime when the office is closed and people are not there. That's an easy way to overcome that. Otherwise, you announce that there's going to be a restore test. It's going to take an hour. Please go to lunch on this hour, and thank you very much for your cooperation. Testing can be costly. Let's face it, people have to do certain things, and certain arrangements need to be made. So, and most importantly, it takes time. It can be very time-consuming, depending on how well it goes. And time is money. So, a lot of people are very conscious that it's going to take a lot of time to do this, and we just don't have the time because there's always time to do it over, but there's never time to do it right. Take the time. It is worth the investment of time and money to make sure that your data is safe, because burn this in your brain, it's all about the data. Everything those of us in IT do, everything everybody who's listening to me right now does, it's all about the data. And so, protecting the data in this way is critical. Some people think testing is difficult, and these days it's getting easier and easier because you're seeing more and more utilities to facilitate frequent testing. And the folks like the people you're going to hear from today at Unitrends want to make sure that people are observing best practices, so they're doing everything they can to give you the utilities and the tools you need to be observant of those best practices. Use them. Lastly, testing may require an update to your disaster recovery plan. A disaster recovery plan is a very big document and a very important document. It is not just a schedule of what data gets backed up and what data will have to be restored. That's one section of your overall disaster recovery plan. It's a comprehensive guide to what everybody is going to do in the event of a disaster, where everybody is going to go, how they're going to regain access to the company network and their resources, what steps need to be taken to begin the restoration process and get back up and running. There's all kinds of considerations, and it's always good to have a professional who's done it many times come in with their own checklist of what needs to be included and have a comprehensive disaster recovery plan, and preferably one that you rehearse regularly as part of your testing. It's always good to test to make sure that people do the right thing at the worst possible time. So the solutions available to you to assure that you have successful restoration every time. Number one, first and foremost, I'm not kidding about the disaster recovery plan. Keep it updated and available. Know where it is. Know how to get your hands on it. And don't just leave it on the network, because if the network goes down, you can't get it. Make sure there's a printed copy in a binder somewhere where everybody who's important knows where it is. The one time I'll tell you to print something. Second thing is test frequently. Set up a regular schedule of testing and make it law that the test will occur and the results will be examined. Inspect what you expect. If you expect the backup system to provide a data backup that you can restore, make sure that that's what you're getting. I don't know if I can be any clearer than that. Now, there is, of course, one way in which you can make all of this much easier. There is nothing easier in life than having somebody else do stuff for you. It's why my wife makes me take her out to restaurants so regularly. No, seriously. It is preferable when you have experts running a data center. If you're not large enough to staff with a team of experts, consider using the cloud more. And because cloud data centers are managed by experts. Same thing with disaster recovery and especially with data backup. There are companies that are professional at it. This is what they do for a living. And that's what's given us DRAAS, disaster recovery as a service. You can engage a company to take care of it end to end. And then all you need to do is have them submit their reports of their testing. These companies use automated recovery techniques that allow them to do it much faster than you can. Not only back up much faster, but restore much faster and more certainly and more consistently as well. So that is my cue to introduce Adam Margette. Adam is from Unitrends, and he's going to talk to you about how to resolve all of these problems, either yourself or with the assistance of a DRaaS provider. Adam?
Absolutely, Howard. Thank you so much, and hopefully, absolutely, we'll give some folks some different things to think about, maybe some different things that they can take home and think about. How is our organization doing things today? Just before we kind of dive into the what and the how, Howard, where you mentioned that this is what professionals do. They've got the experience and the expertise. Did want to introduce, Unitrends to folks that are maybe just hearing or coming across us for the first time. We've been in this space for a while. Actually, celebrated our 30th anniversary as a company last month. Originally founded in 1989. A little trivia for folks: if you were wondering where the Uni came from, when we were founded by Steve Schwartz in the late 80s, he was working with a lot of medical industry and healthcare providers. They were primarily running Unix systems, and there was not a data protection solution in the marketplace at that time that they found adequate to their needs. So Steve went about kind of orchestrating and writing the code for what eventually, now 30 years later, has evolved into Unitrends. With that being said, we've spent the last 3 decades making data backup and disaster recovery our singular focus, and now over 30,000 customers across the globe trust Unitrends for their data protection and disaster recovery needs. We do have a proprietary manufacturer's operated cloud solution, of which we're managing over 100 petabytes of customer data. And you can see roughly the pinpoints on the map there of where those data centers are located globally. Really backing and supporting everything that we do, and I think absolutely when you consider the nature of our business, critically important is our customer support organization. I like to make mention of those folks. They do a fantastic job supporting our community of users, and it's something that we place a tremendous amount of emphasis, investment, and pride into here. You can see on the screen there a couple of the Stevie Awards that we won year over year for our customer service. Absolutely mission critical. I think that organization is top notch given the nature of the solutions and the products that we provide. Now, it's interesting because when we think about the causes of downtime, and some of them are similar to what Howard had mentioned in our inability to restore, but it's not necessarily those headline-grabbing incidents that are most commonly affecting our day-to-day operations, much more commonly than we see natural disasters or even malware and attacks. It's things like human error and software issues. We see that a tremendous amount. While there are different severities, I would say there's kind of a spectrum here. It may be much easier and much less painful to recover a file that was actually accidentally deleted than it would be to recover from a ransomware attack. I just think that it's important to ensure that when we're thinking about our organization and our ability to respond, do we have the right strategies in place to guard us against a myriad of different disasters? And as Howard had said, really test for what you expect and kind of expect the unexpected in some cases, because those headline-grabbing incidents are not necessarily the most common causes of data loss and downtime that we see. Another kind of scary issue is that even with the technology and some of the services and solution providers out there today, a large minority are still experiencing downtime. The data that we're looking at here was from the Unitrends Cloud and State of Data Protection Survey. It's run by our marketing organization every year, over 400 respondents across a number of industry verticals. And we do see some challenges. I think overall, as IT professionals, we're being tasked with an increasing amount of work, projects, risk while being provided with less budget for investment in that capital infrastructure. Everything is being driven towards application availability. We now have data and workloads that are living in multiple places. So ultimately, as things are growing more and more complex, we don't necessarily always have the resources with which to combat some of these issues. But here at Unitrends, what we would really recommend is leveraging one solution for the entire stack, reducing some of those what we would consider kind of low-value IT tasks. I think as our infrastructure has evolved, folks have found themselves kind of Frankensteining in different solutions. Maybe we had invested in a product, 10, 15 years ago or however long it was to protect our traditional, our x86 tenant physical servers. And then we started to virtualize around 10 years ago when that really was commoditized and started to build a lot of steam. We added in a separate or a secondary platform for protection for a virtual environment. We have different vendors for secondary storage, for data reduction, deduplication compression. Have we started to look at the cloud, potentially another vendor in there as well? And when we look at kind of the evolution of these kind of Frankenstein solutions, we see it as opening up potential more points of failure, as well as inviting in some of those low-value tasks, the day-to-day tuning and management of the systems. As Howard had mentioned, when you update a patch or a version of software on one system, does that risk breaking the interoperability that it had between other dependent systems? Even from a management standpoint, are you having to go through multiple interfaces to perform common tasks? Even from a management standpoint, multiple line items, contracts that we're juggling, different vendors and support calls, where then again that finger pointing becomes an issue, that we've got an issue with our restore. Software vendor is convinced that's an issue with the hardware vendor. They're pointing fingers back at the software vendor. Ultimately, we know that the restore hasn't worked. We want to talk to someone that can immediately help us, regardless if our solution or if our issue is hardware, software, or cloud-based. And that's really where Unitrends can come in. When we talk about all-in-one, I kind of mean it in a couple of perspectives. Let's start with where Unitrends is deployed, and we'll still deploy in the local environment. There's flexibility for our customers and how they choose to deploy. You can use a capacity-based rack mount appliance. That all-in-one backup appliance has the software pre-tuned and preloaded, as well as the compute, memory, and storage resources to orchestrate your local backup and recovery processes, save backup copies on the appliance in that secondary storage that are available for immediate recovery, orchestrate your testing, reporting as well from that appliance. And we can protect natively over 250 operating systems, applications, and hypervisors. So there's a good bet that we'd be able to help in some cases reduce the amount of point products that you're managing locally in your environment today. You can also, if you're looking to leverage existing server and storage resources, can leverage our software installed as a virtual appliance on top of VMware, Hyper-V, Citrix Zen, Nutanix, AHV. A few different options there for install. Absolutely. While the local hardware and software will help prevent against those issues locally, recover individual files, folders, restore our guests, our virtual machines, it's critically important, as Howard had said, to still get a copy of that data off-site. And there's a myriad of choices for Unitrends customers. You can replicate. If you're looking to establish a secondary site or you've got multiple locations, you can replicate from an instance of our hardware or software to an instance of our hardware or software that's available at the DR site. If you don't have a secondary location and you're looking to leverage cloud, you can deploy Unitrends software through the AWS or the Azure marketplaces, both as a replication target and to protect those cloud-based instances. Or you can leverage the Unitrends cloud as well. Again, we are not AWS, we are not Azure. It is a proprietary manufacturer's operated solution, really designed to enable our customers with long-term retention and disaster recovery as a service, which is that last tier, that no-touch failover process where there's been a critical disaster or an outage. Your primary responsibility as far as the infrastructure is making a phone call to our U.S.-based support center, declaring a disaster from there. We have already seeded that data, defined things like the networking configurations, boot order dependencies. We bring the environment up live in our cloud and help you reroute that user traffic while you work through some of the additional steps or procedures in responding to that disaster or that outage. So from a local perspective, we're able to help folks consolidate the point products that they're using to protect the environment today. And from a business continuity perspective, being able to coalesce local backup, off-site recovery, long-term retention and management, and that disaster recovery as a service under a single vendor has really streamlined that experience for a lot of our customers and removed some of the complexity in managing multiple point products or having to orchestrate portions of the environment that they may have to be running themselves, whether that's a secondary site or trying to stand up DR infrastructure within a public cloud environment. A lot of expertise, manpower, and investment is going to be required to be doing those things. And at Unitrends, again, we've tried to simplify and streamline that by taking a lot of that responsibility upon ourselves as the service provider. When Howard had mentioned ransomware, and it's a threat that is increasingly growing, I think it was Cybersecurity Ventures has estimated, and studies indicate that we're on average about every 14 seconds there is a ransomware attack that is launched. We're seeing estimates that that's going to increase about every 11 seconds by 2021. They're gaining confidence, momentum. The proliferation of things like ransomware as a service has made it increasingly difficult to track the sources of some of these threat actors, even the organizations that they may be tied to, because we see a lot of folks that for a small one-time fee or a small portion of the profits are given a kit from the code developers and can go about initiating their own threats or their own attacks. While we are not a cybersecurity company, there is some resilience and augmentation that Unitrends can enable customers when it comes to the backup and the DR environment. From a prevention standpoint, the majority of the binary that we've observed in the marketplace today and that security experts have observed as well is primarily Windows, targeting Windows code. It's the largest addressable install market from an OS basis. They're getting increasingly advanced by trying to disable antivirus, wipe backups off of repositories. When it comes to the architecture of the Unitrends appliances, we are built on a hardened CentOS Linux kernel. Linux is a little bit more flexible in how you can build out the storage partitions, and so we're landing our backups in an immutable zone. It is read-only. And even if Windows binary was backed up and landed in that zone, it's not going to be executing against Linux-based file extensions. That's not to say that we've never created a bad backup or backed up bad data, but we have never in our 30 years had an appliance compromised by ransomware or malware. We also, on the front end of things, have a machine learning algorithm that comes with every Unitrends appliance. As we're taking backups of the physical clients, the virtual machines, the storage in your environment, the Unitrends appliance will establish baseline patterns of behavior based off of a number of heuristic characteristics, things like change rates, the overall entropy or the randomness of the data, the density of the data, levels of encryption. Once those baseline patterns are established, if broken, it will trigger an alert. You will be alerted to anomalous threat conditions, both through our appliance interface as well as email alerting, so that you can identify or investigate the source of what potentially could be malicious activity. If it is deemed to be an infection, you're able to quarantine that machine, wipe that machine, review other logs to identify, hey, was this machine patient 0, or where did we start to see data really changing rapidly, so that you can identify the infected clients. And the last piece is our recovery assurance testing. It's automated. It is built in. We're going to talk a little bit more about recovery assurance because it's so absolutely critical. Howard had really stressed the importance of testing. At Unitrends, we would as well. But we're taking you a layer beyond screenshot verification with this. Screenshot verification, I have a colleague that affectionately refers to it as Schrodinger's backup. We've backed the client up. We have a backup file that's been completed. We've brought to the login screen, but we didn't go inside that machine. We didn't verify the integrity of the data. We don't know, will it restore, will it won't? It's unclear. There's a great white paper on disaster recovery testing at unitrends.com, the hyperlink that's on your screen here. But we've also seen through that cloud survey, folks are starting to test. They are increasing the amount of testing. The folks that are not testing has gone down over our survey respondents over the last 3 years. Again, a great sample size of different organizations. Not all of these are Unitrends customers. We're not just asking our community here, but really the IT community at a whole. But as Howard had said, still too many organizations are testing at least one time per year, or at only one time per year. And that leaves avenue for so many different things to go wrong, whether it be different version updates, as Howard said, changes in media, so many different pieces, so much changes within a year. Is that really an accurate representation? We would recommend that you test as frequently as feasibly possible, and every time that you're testing, in a lot of cases, we're learning something new. We can update and continue to improve our DR plans based on the results or what we've learned from that test. At Unitrends, as I had mentioned, it's a fully automated process here. And again, the testing is really designed to kind of simulate what that failover scenario would look like. In addition to benchmarking compliance objectives, recovery point, and recovery time actuals, you can orchestrate application-level scripts, things like testing Windows services, SQL services, Exchange. You can run your own custom scripting, scan drives and folders for malware, really simulate, what are some of the services that these machines rely on. You can also simulate or design boot order, re-IP the machines, reconfigure them with CPU and memory if there are going to be different resources available on a recovery target than what we're running in production, really simulate what that failover is going to look like. This is enabled locally on our appliances through what we call data copy access, but it's also a part of our recovery assurance. Recovery assurance and disaster recovery as a service where we're running almost 50,000 tests per year for our customers that are enrolled in DRAS. And again, really drills you in and identifies per boot order on a machine level where there are issues to proactively identify what may impact recovery. One example, if you've got multiple DPUs or multiple solutions that are competing for the same log files, you may have a backup of SQL that's completed seemingly with no errors, but we've had multiple DPUs competing for those logs. Ultimately, the log file is empty. We're not able to restore the database to a particular point in time. The backup is no good. Recovery assurance will help identify some of those issues with the environment, with the infrastructure that we're landing or recovering the backups to, so that we can proactively identify where there may be issues in restore. So locally, absolutely, we've seen or hopefully I've been able to kind of convey how Unitrends is able to help folks from a local environment perspective. But we also have cloud services, and as Howard had mentioned, cloud storage is becoming increasingly more affordable for a lot of organizations. At Unitrends, we've made it incredibly predictable from a year-over-year pricing model, really easy to get started with Unitrends cloud services, and that starts with some of that licensing. So again, we are not AWS, we are not Azure. They're very, very cheap on the front. Hey, dump your data into S3. You're paying pennies per gig, really inexpensive. When you start to see those retrievals is when you get into the need for actually calling upon their infrastructure and you start running instances in EC2, for example, or when you need to retrieve data as well. The Unitrends Cloud Survey had revealed 60% of respondents needed to retrieve data at least once per year, and about 15% of those folks were recovering data more than 5 times per year. So we're not just dumping it and leaving it, but we may need it upon restore, and that's where those costs start to really pile up for folks, is when you start getting into those egress or those fees of retrieval. At Unitrends, we've made the cloud licensing incredibly straightforward and a la carte here. So it starts with the protected capacity. How much raw data at your local site before deduplication and compression do you want to replicate to the Unitrends cloud? You license that out in 500 gigabyte increments. You're not required to license the same capacity as you're protecting locally. You can start small and start to build as your environment or your needs change, or you can start to enroll more aggressively. Total flexibility in how much capacity you're licensing out when you get started. On top of capacity, you'll determine the retention period. We store backup copies from anywhere from 90 days, 1 to 7 years, even infinitely, and they'll be stored for you on a GFS rotation. So once that retention has been built, you'll have access to your most recent 7 daily copies and then the most recent successful backup from each of the last 4 weeks, 12 months, and subscribed number of years. There are no egress fees with the Unitrends cloud. You can view all of the available recovery points or backup copies that you have within the cloud environment right from your local interface. Immediately take action upon those backup files to perform granular item restore. Can just download individual files and folders, restore them back to the local environment, or import the entire backup group, the point in time we wish to recover to, and its group of dependents back to the full or synthetic full to initiate full recovery of a system. Now, if you're looking for Unitrends to handle recovery in the cloud environment, you'd enroll machines in disaster recovery as a service. It's an extensive service, and where Howard talks about expertise, our program has created a tremendous amount of confidence, so much so that we are contractually guaranteeing the RTO SLAs, and more on that in a minute. But it's going to start by determining and working with our cloud consulting group on what are the protected systems that are going to be enrolled, what are the RPO and RTO requirements, and our responsibilities as the DR vendor. We assist with seeding into the Unitrends cloud. We can help get larger data sets up there so that we're not transmitting terabytes and terabytes over the WAN. Once that data is seeded, we work through with our customers to define things like the boot order dependencies, networking configurations, firewall rules, the configuration of public-facing IPs where needed, as well as those application-level scripts that will be executed during our automated testing. We'll continue to execute the testing, monitor resource utilization and allocation, monitor the results of testing, replication, ongoing on a regular basis. So we're fully prepared when we receive that phone call to initiate the spin-up and the failover of our customers' mission-critical machines. There are 3 levels of that DR service. I apologize if the text is a little bit small on this slide here, but they are based on the RTO SLA. We offer Premium, Elite, and Standard, which are a 1-hour RTO SLA, 24-hour RTO SLA, and a best effort RTO SLA, respectively. With that 1-hour RTO SLA, that premium DRAS really designed for the most mission-critical machines. We're testing them on a weekly basis, reporting back to you. You've got a very robust instance, 24 vCPU, 128 gigs of RAM per machine that you have enrolled in that premium level of service. Elite is more of a middle tier, kind of the best value service, a 24-hour RTO SLA for those business critical or business important VMs, but things that we can live without for a little bit more of an extended period of time. We're testing Elite machines on a monthly basis, reporting back to you on those regularly. And Standard is our best effort RTO SLA. All of our DRAS is a queue-based system. So if a significant disaster impacts a number of our customers along the eastern seaboard, there are a myriad of outages there, we're prioritizing the premium machines followed by Elite, followed by Standard. But we will work to bring Standard machines up as fast as possible. You still have our award-winning services team that is backing you there. And the nice thing about the Standard level of service is that you can license it on a per-instance basis or against the entire replicated volume as you license the Unitrends cloud. So that is to say, if you have 500 gigs of data that is being replicated to us, you can enroll 500 gigs worth of Standard DRAS. Any machine that's eligible being replicated within that volume can be enrolled in the service. We are so confident in our SLAs and some of the preparation that we've taken to make the cloud environment available, the creation of replicas, leveraging instant recovery. We are financially backing our RTO SLAs. There's fiscal penalty to Unitrends recourse for our customers if we were ever unable to meet an SLA. I can tell you that the longest it has taken us to boot a machine has been 18 minutes. It was a multi-tiered ERP application for one of our customers down in Florida. They actually have made a couple of declarations, the first back in 2017 when Hurricane Irma made landfall and threatened their production site. Most recently this year when Hurricane Dorian similarly was passing through and potentially could have impacted their production site. There are a couple of case studies as well on Unitrends.com. Safety products is a great one to check out because it's one of the questions that we get all the time. You know, it sounds great, nice service, but has anyone ever had to use it? And the answer is a confident, unequivocal yes. Lastly here, just wanted to diagram kind of what this looks like for folks so you get an idea or an understanding of the service here. We are replicating from Unitrends to that cloud stack. We have a environment essentially on reserve for you based on the reserved or enrolled machines. When disaster strikes the local site, we receive that phone call. We initiate what we call our instant recovery to provide a near zero RTO, and we'll also create replicas, which are essentially standby copies of production clients that are updated with every backup and ready to be brought live at a moment's notice. So we initiate instant recovery or bring the data online in our cloud stack, provide folks typically with SSL VPN connection to reroute traffic to the infrastructure that's now running in the Unitrends cloud. You maintain production for as long as you need to start to rebuild that local site. We're continuing to take backups of those VMs or machines that are running in our cloud so you don't have this gap of days or weeks where you've been running in the cloud, and all of a sudden, hey, where'd all that data go? We're continuing to take backups as you're running within our cloud environment. When you're ready to restore the local site, we're going to seed a full copy of the data on a brand new replacement appliance or a NAS device for our software users, and overnight that back to you so that you can start to import the backups to the local environment. We're still continuing to run as you're rebuilding that local environment. Well, lastly, as you're getting ready to restore, start to notify us, hey, we need to perform that final sync. We'll sync up with the most recent changes or the most recent backup that we have. You're ready to bring the environment live. We tear down our cloud stack. You reroute that traffic back down to the local data center. We send a prep kit to capture changes and prepare for a future declaration or a future event. Just a high-level kind of overview of that service. So I really appreciate the invitation here. Again, hopefully folks have had some different things to think about here, whether it be cloud, the ability to leverage automated testing. If there's additional information that you would like regarding Unitrends or the Unitrends solution, please feel free to indicate so in the poll portion here. We also have a couple of helpful links that we'll put up in a moment here as we move towards the conclusion in the Q&A session. But I thank everyone for joining us, Redmond Magazine for having us on today. Going to pass things back over at this time to Howard to see if we have any Q&A.
Yeah, we only have a few questions, Adam, and thank you. That was a great presentation of a great solution. I think that the next slide after the survey will answer one of these questions. So let me just do the other two while we're waiting. The first one is, can you choose different levels of DRAS as part of one DR plan?
Absolutely, and I apologize. I should have mentioned that. You can mix and match those levels of service as to best suit your needs. If you've got mission critical infrastructure like that ERP system that has to be back up and running, that may be a great fit for premium. Some secondary or some less critical workloads that may make sense to bring along if we're looking at a more extended outage could certainly be enrolled in elite or standard levels of the service. But you can mix and match to find the right level of incident response for your organization and for your budget.
Great. I just saw the slide pop up. Somebody had asked, how do we get started with Unitrends? I think all the links you need are here, but if there's anything else you'd like to mention, Adam, that would be great.
I think absolutely. We're gonna put those links up for folks in a moment. But I would recommend you visit unitrends.com. There are a great number of resources available to you, full-featured trial licensing, certainly the contact information to get in touch with our sales and our business continuity experts. We have a number of events, public demonstrations that are run through the web, so you can hop on and kind of take a look at the platform and the interface. But unitrends.com, a great place to start, and again, we can post that slide for the last couple of moments once the poll closes. Some great takeaways for folks.
It may not have reached you, but it is up already, so people can take down those links that are up there while we're talking. You mentioned in the course of your presentation the Unitrends Cloud. Can you talk a little bit about the SOC compliance and the other compliance that the Unitrends Cloud has built in?
I think that's a great question. And because we are not AWS or Azure, folks may not be as familiar. But the Unitrends operates multiple Tier 3 data centers. They are SSAE 18 certified, so they do meet the mandates for SOC 2 Type 2 compliance. We also hold certification or meet the standards of a number of industry regulations, CGIS, GDPR. I think that by leveraging a combination of our encryption and certain retention periods, we can help organizations maintain HIPAA compliancy as well. But a full list of the cloud compliances, additional information about the controls, physical permission to the data center, monitoring, and so forth are available on our website at unitrends.com by searching for the Cloud FAQ.
Excellent. Okay, I don't have any further questions here. You can, of course, if you're still out there and have a question, you can enter it on the Q&A console. But I do want to leave everybody with just a repeat of something I said during my introduction, and that is the concept of skepticism. One of the best pieces of advice anybody ever gave me early on in my career was that I should maintain a healthy skepticism. And in the case of data backup, my skepticism has always told me this data backup is not going to be successful. This data backup is going to fail. I have no doubt in my mind, so I better make sure. And it's funny, but it's true. When you have that skepticism protecting you, you take all the right steps to inspect what you expect, to make sure that everything went off the way it was supposed to, and that there will be no surprises out the other end. So for everything else that we can present to you, the one thing that will serve you best is your own personal sense of skepticism. Adam, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Howard, I think you summed it up perfectly. I would just again say thank you for everyone that came out and joined us today. It was a pleasure being on, so thank you.
Thank you all.
So with that, I would like to thank Howard and Adam. You guys did a great job today, and we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and for taking the questions in the Q&A. And I'd also like to thank the audience for today's webcast, for sponsoring today's webcast. That was Unitrends, and it was presented by Redmond. So thanks again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. This concludes our webcast.